Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, as always, we've got a real treat. Miss Henna Pryor is in the house. Henna is a workplace performance expert, two-time TEDx speaker, global keynote speaker, author, and executive coach. She is also the author of Good Awkward, which I'm very excited to talk about. Henna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Likewise. It's great when we have an opportunity to talk about people that are in a similar industry. And I had found you on LinkedIn. I'm not sure how, but when I clicked on your title and I saw what you do and I saw the title of your book, Good Awkward, I said, we need to dive into this because, for one thing, I've always said that, I don't believe perfect exists, and I don't believe people should strive to achieve perfect. In fact, I would argue that who you are, your quirkiness, your weirdness, your imperfections, all those things make you who you are and make you great, amazing. And we need to embrace who we are because people want that. I don't think we want perfect. I don't
Yeah.
want my wife or my kids or anyone else to be perfect. I want them to be authentically them. So
Mm-hmm.
that resonated with me. What I want to ask you, though, before we get into that, is tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. And I can't wait to talk about all of that. So gosh, the journey was a wildly imperfect one. Let's start there. I think it's a story that many who were raised similarly to me will have some resonance with. I am a firstborn child of immigrant parents. My mom is from Pakistan. My dad's from India. I was the first raised in the United States. And, anyone that has that sort of origin story knows a little bit of what that brings as far as uniqueness. Firstborn means my clothes were always a bit different. My food in my lunchbox was a bit different. My name was a bit different. As much as I wanted to be Jennifer or Samantha or Jessica growing up in the early 80s, here I was with the name Henna in the era of Hanna-Barbera when all I wanted was just to fit in. And it felt like all of my bumpy edges were constantly on display. And so, I've always been friendly. I've always been extroverted, but, awkwardness was very much part of my origin story growing up. I think I carried that through middle school, probably through most of high school. And it wasn't until I got to college that I think I started to settle into owning my identity a bit more, finding myself a bit more comfortable amongst my voice, my peers. But then I got to my professional life. And the interesting thing that I found happening was, despite all the material success, I grew up in an achievement oriented household, got the good grades, got the good job. I found that at every inflection point of my career, every transition point, that feeling of awkwardness that I thought I had mastered a year before, 2 years before, 3 years before, at every inflection point, at every big growth moment, that feeling came rushing back like a tidal wave. And so a lot of that exploration around that emotion is what informs the work I do today. And that work is as a keynote speaker, author, coach, and all the other things that you mentioned. And I have the job of my dreams. And I'm very, very grateful.
Awesome. So you talk about awkward. Let's define that because there might be people who don't feel that way. And I recognize that's not everyone. However, I'm guessing more people than not feel awkward or maybe like they don't fit in. And for any of the reasons you mentioned and some beyond.
Yeah.
What is awkward?
Yeah. I love the question because I think it's important to anchor into this. There's ways that people use this word. So let's first just give a definition and then we're going to get a bit more specific about it. A working definition for the context of today is awkwardness is the emotion that we feel when the person we believe ourselves to be, in other words, our true self, is facing a gap momentarily with the person who we think other people see on display. So a simpler way to say this is for a moment or moments, our internal identity doesn't match other people's external reality. And in that in-between space, between these two selves, we feel the emotion of awkwardness. So I love what you just said about, not everyone identifies as this. I think interestingly, we've pathologized this word a little bit because people use it one of two ways. So by definition, it is an emotion. It is a social emotion, meaning we tend to feel it when we're in front of other people. But there are a lot of people who use that word not just as an emotion or as a transient state, meaning I feel awkward right now. I'm feeling the emotion of awkwardness, but a lot of people use that word as a trait, as in, I am awkward. I am socially awkward. I am just a socially
Yeah.
awkward human being. So, first fun fact as we go into the rest of this conversation, there is no such thing as a factually awkward person.
So you can't be part-time or full-time?
No, you can't be
Awkward.
moonlighting as an awkward person. No, not factually. It's a subjective thing. It's a statement of
Mhm.
opinion. So when you call yourself awkward or you call someone else awkward, just know that when you use that term as a trait, it is an opinion. It is not a statement of fact. And for some people, they can be very empowered by it. Wow, I'm so awkward, but here I am doing the thing anyway. Or for some people, it becomes a limiting box of their own
Yeah.
making and it prevents them from doing the things that they really want to do with their life.
Okay. So when you talk about this, I'm hearing a lot of resonance to the phrase imposter syndrome. Is
Mm.
imposter syndrome a cousin, a second cousin to awkwardness?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book where we talk about this at length. There's
Oh,
first of all, I have to push back on the word syndrome, and especially as a woman and a woman of color,
hmm,
I cannot stand the phrase imposter syndrome. It makes it sound like an affliction that we either have or don't have. I prefer the phrase imposter thoughts. We are having imposter thoughts. We are not
I love
afflicted
your
with
perspective on
the
that.
syndrome. It's a common one amongst female executive coaches, I think, because the syndrome implies we need medication, we need a cure, something is wrong with us. Versus imposter thoughts empowers us to believe that there are thoughts that will occur, but that we can manage them, eventually work towards befriending them, eliminating them. But to answer your question, what a lot of people describe as quote unquote imposter syndrome, it's become the blanket term that we use to describe all feelings of self doubt. Anytime we're
Yeah.
experiencing feelings of self doubt, it's very easy now because of common vernacular to say, oh, this is my imposter syndrome kicking in. When actually, there is a difference between healthy self doubt and
Yeah.
unhealthy self doubt. So the relationship between this and awkwardness is very, very clear. What I call bad awkward is when we experience that emotion of awkwardness so acutely that it puts its hooks in us and it stops us from taking a risk in the future or raising our hand in the future or engaging with someone in the future. That's very similar to unhealthy self doubt. Unhealthy self doubt paralyzes us, it freezes us
Yes.
in place. Good awkward is when we recognize that every time we're trying to do something new, every time we're a beginner again, every time we're trying to learn, grow, expand our horizon a little bit, awkwardness is inevitable. It's universal. And getting good at it, or similarly, feeling healthy self doubt, but doing it anyway, is the key to our success. So, yes, these two are very, very closely related.
So when you're working with someone, and let's focus on individual rather than maybe a
Mhm.
company for now. What is the first step in helping someone? Because so much of what I've seen in my experience with training and workshops and different frameworks is that we have to build the self awareness around what it is, maybe accept the fact that we have it, or maybe something that, okay, we're accepting it, but we're accepting it as potentially a positive, just
Mhm.
changing our framework. How do you go about that?
Yeah, I think, it starts with getting clear on what are the stories we tell ourselves. So just to go a little deeper into the earlier point, how do you use that word? Do you say, "Gosh, I am so awkward. I am just so awkward." And then it stops you, right? If you use that word
Yeah.
as a box of I'm too awkward to speak up in this meeting. I'm too awkward to volunteer to give this presentation or speak in front of my peers. That is a box of your own creation. So I want to challenge you to first just do a quick analysis. How do you use that phrase? Could we start to reframe that into, well, naturally, this is a big moment for me, so I'm feeling awkward about it right now, or I'm nervous, I'm going to embarrass myself, right? What is the language that we're using? The second piece of building awareness is, again, slowing down. This is going to be a theme to recognize when you do experience an awkward moment or an embarrassing moment or a cringe moment, which you will, because you're human and you live in an age of uncertainty, unless you figured out how to eliminate uncertainty. And if you did, holler at your girl. We all want to know, right? But unless you
Yeah.
figured that out, You will not
Yeah.
avoid awkwardness. So, in those moments where you do inevitably experience that emotion, what is the story that you tell yourself? Is it Dan McAdams out of Northwestern University calls these a redemptive story versus a
Mm.
contamination story? So, a
Ooh, I like that.
contamination story is, oh my gosh, I said that thing in the meeting. Everybody rolled their eyes, thought it was the stupidest thing they've ever heard. I feel embarrassed that I even bothered to raise my hand. I'm never going to do that again. I'm not even going to speak up next time. That was a stupid idea. That experience, that emotion put such a grip on us that it contaminated the future, right? It poisoned the well of us trying that thing again.
Mm.
Versus a redemptive story requires a lot more slowing down, a lot more intention. And the phrase I like is it requires us to look for the gifts in the garbage. So, yes, that didn't feel great. I wish people would have responded to that differently. And you know what, Henna? You don't normally raise your hand in that meeting. You spoke up. That's worthy of a gold star. And hopefully next time it'll land differently. But you should be proud of yourself for actually doing that thing that normally makes you quite fearful. That's looking for a gift in the garbage. If we can slow ourselves down long enough following an awkward moment to find the redemptive story, we're much more likely to get stuck in its hooks the next time that comes around.
Yeah. I think for men, can only speak for myself, but
Mhm.
what is the story we are telling ourselves? And as someone who's in his 40s, sometimes I think to myself, well, I've got it figured out. Well, I don't need to tell myself a story, or I don't need that. When in reality, just when you think things are going really good, life can throw you a curveball, and you may have those days or moments where you need to tell yourself the right story, a good story.
Yeah. Yeah, the
But I'm
level
more.
setting is sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, the level setting is more important than it's ever been because unfortunately in the increasingly technological era that we find ourselves living in, it is extremely easy for us to feel like we're the only one because we're
Yeah.
not observing other people as often and as readily tripping over their own 2 feet, sticking their foot in their mouth, bumping into someone at the water cooler. We're not all working in the same ways that we used to. And so, because of that, we've lost practice ourselves, but we've also lost the experience of being witness to other people's human, unnaturally, ungraceful moments. And increasingly, we don't observe them in other people. We put that spotlight even more acutely on us. It must just be us. We must be the only ones that can't get our lives together, when in fact, it couldn't be further from the truth. But the systems that we find ourselves living in just perpetuate that feeling.
Yeah. It reminds me of a comment I put in my first book, and I've said quite frequently, is that if you can't learn to laugh at yourself, it's going to be really hard to smile when the good things in life happen. And
I love that.
sometimes it's just a reminder to myself that if I do something clumsy, if I make a mistake, if I screw something up, it's just I got to be able to laugh at it because I wasn't paying attention. It was just an oversight, and it's just like, all right, I know I'm better than that. That's
hmm
the story I'm telling myself.
Yeah, I think humor is such a powerful diffuser of some of these social emotions of
Mm.
discomfort. We have got to stop taking every little gaffe so seriously. But when we don't see others doing it, again, human nature is to catastrophize, to amplify, to magnify in our brains. It's just me. I'm such a moron. I'm somehow inept. And I think this is a key part of it is awkwardness is not the same as ineptitude. Awkwardness is not the same as having no skills in
Yeah.
a certain area. Awkwardness speaks to the very natural and very human emotion that we experience when our expectations go sideways or our two selves are at odds. There is no avoiding it. There's no avoiding it at all. It's universal. Even the most confident people we know experience this emotion. But what we can do is improve our comeback rate. And humor is one way to do that.
Improve our comeback rate. You're gonna have to go into that a little deeper because that really piques my interest. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So knowing that awkwardness is unavoidable and knowing that it's universal. So let me just, stick a pin on that a little bit further. The most confident people you've ever met in your life, the people that you look at and think, gosh, They never get it wrong. They never say the
Right.
wrong thing or say the wrong name. They've got this. They've got life on lock. They experience awkwardness just as much as you do. The
I believe
difference
it.
is that it doesn't hook them. They don't get hooked by that emotion. It's not that they get to avoid it. It's not that the cracks on the sidewalk don't exist when they're walking. They just don't get hooked by the emotion. And so what they've learned to master is their comeback rate. They feel it, they take it for what it is, and they figured out techniques and tactics both ahead and following and in the moment to move on from it quickly, to not have it derail the rest of their plans for the day. So the mindset work ahead, what are the stories you're telling yourself? What are the ways that you use the language? And I'll also add to that, what are the stories that you've grown up with or some of your conditioning? So I'll quickly share as it relates to my comeback rate. It took a while for me to be able to exercise my muscle to make my comeback rate quicker because I grew up in a culture where there was a very strong emphasis culturally on what will other people think. So in my culture, there's an expression, and if any of your listeners speak Urdu or Hindi, they'll know this one. It's "log kya kenge," which translates to, but what will other people think? What will the community say about this? And so much of my lifelong conditioning was, don't get it wrong. Don't have an embarrassing misstep. Don't have an awkward moment because everyone is watching you. What will other people think? And so it took me a long time to really sit with that mindset, untangle it, undo it, so that I could go into situations with a little bit of this clarity. The spotlight effect that was first popularized by Tom Gilovich out of Cornell tells us people are not looking at you with nearly the intensity that we think. They're much more quickly back to
Right.
paying attention to themselves. So I had to redo some mindsets that weren't serving me. But then finding myself in the situation, ways that I improve my comeback rate are having some techniques. Some of those are naming awkwardness in the moment. So, ironically, one of the most powerful ways to diffuse an awkward moment is to say something out loud, because ironically, the avoidance of awkwardness increases awkwardness. The more we let
I
it
believe it.
sit there thick in the air, the worse it gets. So, sometimes it's that first person that goes, boy, this is awkward, that actually comes across as the most confident because they're willing to name that thing. Then there's also ways that we can strategically use humor. We can use some of the exercises and principles from improv. There's lots of different things we can do to get better at navigating a moment while we're in it so that comeback rate is faster and we don't find ourselves hooked and ruminating for hours afterwards.
I love that. A lot of times when you talk about these moments when you have to tell yourself a story, I recognize that it happens to me and it happens
Mhm.
regularly.
Yeah.
Um, but I've always said to myself, it's not a problem if it's momentary. And when you have the
Hmm.
self awareness to recognize that it's happening, one of the things that I think of is, squash it. And this is when I say imposter syndrome, but now you're going to get me changing that phrase to something new. It's going to take a while, but I'm going to try. Just squash it like a bug,
Mm,
because I think you're right. All these things are very healthy. But if you say, okay, no, I'm not going to fall victim to this. I am going to conquer this.
mm.
Is that a good way of thinking about it?
Yeah, I love your expression, and I'm going to look in my drawer while we're talking. I've got a few things of my own because so squash it like a bug is one way. I know in the athletics world, Ken Ravizza would teach his players to flush things down the toilet, kind of
Mm.
like these thoughts are going to come. So I have a partnership with a company called Limitless Minds where we focus a lot on mental fitness and mindset training. And one of the main principles that we talk about is this idea of neutral thinking. How do we get something back to neutral? And one of the teachings that we teach our teams is you can't control your first thought. You can't. It's going to come, but you can control your second thought. So this is where I love your squash it like a bug. You can't control your first thought. It's okay. It's going to come. Gosh, I'm
Yeah.
such an awkward idiot. I'm such a dolt. I can't believe I did that. First thought is going to come. That's fine. But it's what you do with that second thought, right? Am I going to sit here and keep telling myself this story, or am I going to intentionally choose a different one? In your case, squash it like a bug, right? Feel it, put it away. Ken Ravizza's case, put it down The toilet. I send these to some of my clients. They're these little tiny crows. So it's just like a
That's
black
cool.
crow. And I actually learned this from Jerry Kalana, who's an executive coach. He talks about there's this little black crow that sits on your shoulder, right? This little critic that's like, you dummy, you shouldn't say this stuff. And sometimes it's helpful to physically pick up the crow, say, thank you, crow, appreciate it. Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but I'm trying to grow and I don't need you today. And just put it away.
The
Like,
no grow crow.
oh, I like it. I might steal that. Yeah, but it's essentially something that allows you to physically have a reset, a phrase, a visual that will help you. That when you naturally have those moments where those thoughts start to put their fingernails into you, it's going to happen. But do you have a mechanism, a phrase, a reset, a visual that's going to help you unhook from it? Because you can control your second thought. You can choose a different second
Yeah.
one if you practice enough, and that's the work.
Is it fair to say you could prevent the third one? Like the third time
Yeah.
it wants to come back, it's like, no,
Once you get good at it,
freaking thought
yes,
prevented the third one.
absolutely. I will say one of my favorite phrases that I use often, I actually learned this from one of my work best friends, Colin Henderson, is that true? Said by who?
Ooh, that's good.
Is that true? Said by who? Henna, you're such an idiot. You shouldn't raise your hand in a meeting and say dumb stuff. Okay. Is that true? Said by who? Often the only answer to that question is, I'm the only one who's saying that. Nobody else is saying that. Only I'm saying that. It's not true. It's a story I'm telling myself. Thank you, Crow. Very kind of you. Time to go away. Move on.
And it's not the title of a Dr. Seuss book.
No, could be.
Okay, so this is a perfect time to talk about this framework within sports. As we record
Mhm.
this, March Madness is kind of in the middle of things. I've often heard coaches, and Dustin and I come from a long background of coaching youth sports, which is, if a game, any game you're playing, tennis, basketball, obviously perfect example right now, a team goes into halftime, they're down by 20 points. It's still
Mhm.
very possible to make a comeback, but a lot
Yeah.
of coaches say things like, it's really more about how you respond.
Oh, yeah.
How are you going to respond? And, I always implore my players, who at this the time are the third, fourth graders,
Mhm.
is, we can only control us. Can't worry about
Yeah.
the refs. We can't worry about the other team, what they're saying, what they're doing. How do you respond? So how do you leverage this in coaching,
Mm.
particularly in sports?
Yeah. I got to give it to my squad at Limitless Mind. So, my speaking that I do on my own is wonderful, but this is where I would say my teammates. So, Limitless Minds was co-founded by NFL quarterback Russell Wilson, his late mental conditioning coach Trevor Moawad, and Harry Wilson and DJ Idson. So, the four of them founded this firm, and this is where getting to neutral is everything. So, neutral thinking was a term coined by the late Trevor Moawad, which essentially speaks to this idea that when we are in a moment that is tough, that is challenging, it is not as helpful sometimes when we're in a negative place where our headspace isn't right to try to swing positive. That's actually hard to do. We're not feeling that way naturally. It's
It's
sometimes
a big
unhelpful
swing.
to just think, yeah, think positive, think positive. Instead, there's an in between. There's something called neutral, which is getting back to truth, getting back to facts, no judgment, no grading, no assigning value. Again, we're going to have that first thought that's emotionally charged, but getting to neutral means focusing on the facts instead of the feelings, right? What is true? And a great example of getting to neutral, is that true? Said by who, right? What's true now? And so in those moments where something is tough, we're behind by 20 points, we're having a tough run, is I don't want you to swing false positive. In fact, if I told you, just chin up, this is going to be great. I tell you to go take a walk off of a short pier, right? It's annoying. We don't like to hear that. It doesn't make us feel seen, heard, and validated. But what we can do is go back to neutral and go back to process, behaviors, habits. What do we know? So Limitless Minds was founded in athletics, but I'll admit that I'm a non-athlete. I'm actually very uncoordinated. I ride a Peloton and that's it. But my version of this was in the corporate world. And I'll never forget in my 14-year executive search and staffing career, I was top 10% most of my career, very grateful. I had a great run there. And there was one year that I had the worst first quarter on earth. And when I say worst, not only did I not put up a single deal, so like zero, I actually went negative because some of my Q4 deals fell off. They reversed. This is someone who
Ouch.
is used to being sort of top 10% of the company. And I am negative, not just for 1 month, 3 months straight, Q1. And I remember I went into my boss's office crying, being like, I lost my touch. I don't know what happened, but I lost it. Right. And he sat me down and he validated my feelings. And then he said, Henna, when you get into these moments, you've started to lose your self-trust because you're looking at the results, you're looking at the numbers, and you're assigning all your value on that. Just do what you do best. Look at your process, see if you're cutting corners anywhere. If there's anything that you've gotten lazy about, dial that back in. You know how to do this job. Just focus on process. So I kind of was like, fine, right? Mike, shut up. But I did. Not only did I finish that year and make the President's Club trip, I made it in 3 quarters instead of what normally took me 4, just by
Wow.
stopping obsessing over the actual outcome and start focusing on the process. And that's what slowing down and getting to neutral helps you do. So my advice is, if any of these feelings of what are other people looking at, what do they see, how do they envision this, get back to facts. You can't control the first thought, but you can control the second. What's true now? What can you do differently today?
You said something there earlier. Process, behavior was the third one. Balance.
Process, behavior, and habits was what I said earlier. Is kind of, I love James Clear's quote. I think a lot of us in this world use it, but it's, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. To this day, I would be lying to you if I said I love to exercise. I'm not naturally athletic. So I can't rely on my motivation. I have to rely on my routine. I exercise a certain amount of days a week, every week. That's just what I do. I do Peloton on certain days. I do Pilates on Sunday mornings. That's just it. It's just my routine. And so when we get into those moments of I don't feel like it or things feel hard right now, we can't rely on motivation or willpower or outcomes. We have to fall back on process, behavior, and habit. There's really no other shortcuts to success that sustains.
That's interesting you say that, because I got a Peloton, I think, like kind of right in the middle of the pandemic,
Hmm.
and about 2.5 years in, I crossed the 1,000 exercise mark. I did that for a couple
Hmm.
reasons, but when I got it, my wife said to me, like, like a lot of things, she's like, what are you going to use that 5 times? She's like, I bet in two
Yeah.
months you don't use that anymore. And that would be a fair assessment based on some of my previous trends and behaviors. And
Hmm.
so I had a point in my life where I had, experienced some major health concerns, one of them being kind of a low level cancer. And I just got to the conclusion that I can control my health. I can control my life. And I
Hmm.
think that's mostly true. But I also said, like, look, if I don't exercise, I'm going to fall back in the old routine, and the old me, which is when I had major health concerns. I went from taking a lot of pills to taking no pills that were prescribed, and I've felt the best I've ever felt, and I'm 10 years older.
Mm.
And so if when I fall out of that routine, even for a couple of days, I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to get a dad bod. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. And then I keep reminding myself, I'm like, well, if I can go from 1,000 to 1,500, I can remind my wife of that in a couple of months. And
Yeah.
that's my motivation. That's what
Yeah.
works for me. But that's the story I've created.
Mm.
And I keep reminding myself of that story. So after hearing you, talk for the last 20 some minutes about this, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm doing something right.
I love it. I think, what you're speaking to is the inverse of what we talked about at the beginning. It's just the power of identity language. This is why I'm so, frustrated in a way, but lovingly frustrated when people refer to themselves
Yes.
as awkward. When you say, I am an awkward person, that is a strong piece of identity language to use. It shapes
Yeah.
the way you show up in the world. When you say, I am a Peloton rider, that's identity language for you. That's working for you in a positive way. It's just what I do. I don't, we have a place at the beach. My parents have had a store down there for years. And down there, I don't have a Peloton. And so I have to run around the neighborhood. I don't love running. I never have. But I have told myself as an identity piece of language, when I'm at the beach, I'm a runner. It's location based, but when I'm at the beach, I'm a runner. That's just what I do. And I have to use that language because otherwise it becomes a do I feel like running today? No, when I'm at the
Yeah.
beach, I'm a runner. That's just what I do when I'm down there. And so whether it's a short run, long run, whatever it is, that's just the power of identity language, no matter which direction, whether it serves us or doesn't, but we have to choose wisely.
I will say, I think that after a long period of time, you can condition yourself to feel like you are a runner, or feel like, in
Oh
this
yeah.
case, we are Peloton people.
Yeah.
And to the point to where I've convinced myself, or maybe it's not convincing, maybe it's a real thing, that when I'm exercising regularly, I feel better. My
Hmm.
brain function is higher. Now, I am not a physician, I'm not a psychologist, but I can tell physically and mentally, I am a better person for it.
Yeah.
And the conclusion I've always, and the thing I've always said about that is, look, I have a lot of cups to fill, maybe not as much as some people, but between my clients, my business, my family, my kids, my wife, my friends, I want to fill all those cups, but I can't fill those cups unless I fill my cup. And I got
Yeah.
nothing to pour. And so
Yeah.
when I'm able to take care of myself, all of a sudden now I can fill those cups. And so again, maybe that goes back to, that's the story I'm telling
Hmm.
myself, but that's how I feel now. So it's not
Yeah.
like something I have to tell myself. It's just programmed in me after probably 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
which
And
is
I
a long
think
time. It's a
that's
lot of
that
repetition.
it's a lot of repetition, and it's a story that you've had to tell yourself over and over. I think there's some beauty in what you've just said, in that the story just doesn't get told once and then it's, in the fabric of your bones. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. You have to tell yourself,
Yeah.
it gets easier and faster and more lightning speed, but it's the story you tell yourself over and over. And this is where, kind of bring it full circle when we're talking about embracing awkward moments. It is an emotion of discomfort. Your brain does not default to wanting to hang out with emotions of discomfort. So, intentionally telling yourself a different story repeatedly and regularly is how you create those new neural pathways. And, like the physical fitness stuff, I really truly believe I've been really anchoring in this language lately in my keynotes about social fitness. Social emotions
Mm,
require exercise. Being able to talk to
yes.
each other in uncomfortable moments requires exercise. So if you are constantly in the grocery store line with your phone in your face and never look up long enough to catch eyes and smile at someone, then it is going to be very difficult for you to negotiate your raise with your boss. It is going to be very difficult for you to confront your teammate after a hard game. It is going to be very difficult to have that conversation at the Thanksgiving table. If you don't practice in the small moments, you're really going to struggle to make that lift in the big moments. So, our social fitness these days is as important as our physical and mental.
Henna, I'm curious. It brings up a whole conversation with
Mhm.
young people today who are, maybe, let's take the teenagers and the
Yeah.
college students who are about to enter the workforce over the next 5 to 10 years. Let's call it. They've grown up with a device in their hand, right,
Hmm.
wrong, indifferent, good or bad, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of parents say that when these kids get together, I have a teenager, so I've seen it. They just sit on their phone and they don't even have to communicate. I don't necessarily see that as being a terrible thing, but I
Hmm.
fear that when these kids start to get a job, or when they go off to college, or when they enter the workplace,
Yeah.
I am hearing leaders say things like, we are concerned about the young people entering the workforce because, they don't have that, what, I'm just going to take your phrase, social
Yeah.
exercise.
Yeah, no, 100%. So something you may not know about me is I have middle schoolers. I have a daughter who's 14 in 8th grade and then a son who's almost 12 in 6th grade. So I know this one very much so. Unfortunately, they do both have devices. And so I do know this battle. I agree with you that I think it's naive to just be like, all technology is the devil, right? I mean,
Yeah.
since the beginning of time, people have been able to numb social discomfort in a variety of ways, be it drugs, alcohol, a book at the coffee shop if they don't want to talk to somebody, right? There's plenty of ways we can do this. Unfortunately, this one is a very addictive one and very easy to escape into. But where I think we have opportunities as caregivers or teachers or coaches or parents is not trying to eliminate the world that we're moving towards, but creating zones and requirements for where the social component is not optional. So I'll give you just a couple tactical examples. Um, I if sometimes we'll order food online or the app's not working or the website's not working, I make my children call the restaurant. They hate me for it a little bit. But this is
Mhm.
something that they need to know how to do.
That's
When we're at a
awesome.
restaurant, they order their own meal from the server. If something is wrong, if they need a refill on their drink, they need to go up to the counter. They have to do this themselves. And I am insistent that they speak with assertiveness in their voice loudly, and they look the server in the eye. Now, these things sound so rudimentary for those of us who grew up in an environment that was different than this, but so many aren't asking those things. And truly, when my daughter needs to negotiate her salary with her boss, I want her to be able to look her boss in the eye and say something with a confidence in her voice that she will have zero of, if not for practice in these small stakes moments. We also have just a routine that we do at dinner, which is we have 3 dinner table questions. We say, what was the best part of your day? What's something new you learned? But then the third one is, what's something that gave you butterflies today?
Hmm.
The butterflies question is essentially, they understand it to mean, what's a time where maybe you didn't want to raise your hand or have a tough conversation with a friend? You had those kind of, butterflies in your stomach, but you did it anyway. They know that when they come home with a butterflies moment, doesn't matter if it went well or that it was a success, but the fact that they did it, they get a huge round of applause from my husband and I. So it's got
Hmm.
twofold impact. One, that we celebrate those moments, those cringe chasm moments. That's what I call them in the book. Or the second is that it's priming their brains to look for those moments. They know that we celebrate them. So knowing that they're going to be asked daily, they don't always have one, but knowing that we ask daily and that we celebrate them, they're looking for those moments. So my son will come home and go, Mom, I raised my hand in math class today. I was nervous, but I raised it. And I'm like, yeah, that is a butterfly moment, right? But it's
Love it.
priming them to look, which I think is, again, at that age, any little things we can do to increase their social fitness, the better it is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you and I are very aligned on parenting. I do
Mhm.
almost all of those things except for the
Good.
butterfly question, which I was not aware of. One of the things that I found also very helpful is I've got twin daughters who are going to be 9, and they've been very much immersed in activities and sports. And
Mhm.
yes, they are on their devices. And yes, it is kind of like a built in babysitter as a parent. I get it if you throw your kids their devices and let them enjoy them while mom and dad can have some quiet time.
Mhm. Sure.
However, I also think that it's very important to get kids involved in, and I get not everyone's into sports, but get them involved in a sport, in a activity, in a
Yeah.
club, in something additional, because I found a couple things. One is that children are forced to talk to other children they don't know. They're
Yeah.
forced to create friendships. And I've seen this with my kids playing basketball competitively for the first time on a real team, playing real defenses. All of a sudden, you don't really like the fact that you've got all these new players on your team from different schools you've never talked to. And then all of a sudden, you're making best friends. You're talking to coaches, other adults you
Mhm.
don't know. You're
Yep.
forced to have occasional conversation with a referee about, like, hey, why is this referee always making bad calls? And then it's an opportunity
Mhm.
for us as coaches to say, look, sometimes you're going to have calls that you don't agree with. But that's a teaching moment to say, like, look, life's not always fair. If
Yeah.
we didn't like the outcome of losing by a basket, what could we have done differently? Like, let's not blame it on them. I just think there's so many opportunities to teach kids life lessons and get them expanding their mind, expanding their communication capabilities by introducing them. I mean, for me, it's sports, but clubs and
Yeah.
activities are great
Y
too, whether it's Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever.
Right. Yeah, my kids aren't like super, super sports, but 100% with you on the activities thing. Really anything that allows them to be in the presence of other children, and hopefully some of that time, and I know sports is good about this, some of it being less structured, right? Because I think one
Yeah.
of the benefits that we had for some of us who grew up in different generations. Now, I was born in 82, but like, our parents' generation, they grew up playing kick the can in the street. Now, granted, safety things felt different back then, but what
Mm,
they were
yeah.
forced to do is talk about masterclass in conflict resolution, in independent rule creation, setting of social constructs and norms. People were forced to do those things on their own. And they knew how to handle situations when they arose in the workplace where the rules were less clear or less obvious. That adaptability, the agility required to figure things out on the fly is what we're missing. So I 100% agree that they need to get out of just school settings where things are a bit more rigid, a bit more scheduled, and into other opportunities where they're working in group settings where, sometimes the rules are going to be strict, but sometimes it's having to figure it out in the moment as you go, dealing with conflict. Because without some opportunity to build those skills, people are going to get a big dose of culture shock when they enter a professional situation where those things are confronted very, very quickly.
Yeah, there's just not the same level of adversity and conflict in school. I mean, yes, there's some,
Yeah.
but when you juxtapose that to sports, it's a whole new level of
Yeah.
conflict and whatnot.
Agree.
But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is you had mentioned the process, behavior, and habits. So,
Hmm.
as Dustin and I have grown our hustle business and hustle brand, one of the things that I'm just completely surprised by is the level of people who have hit a ceiling, and it's
Hmm.
really more or less a glass ceiling, or the number of people who are stuck in the hamster wheel. It seems to me that the vast majority of these individuals don't have process, they don't have consistent behaviors or habits, and that may be the reason that they're not getting to their goals or crushing their goals even. Is that fair to assume? And I'm sure you attach this to the good awkward as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of it would be my answer. I think there's also plenty of people who have processes and behaviors and habits that are, moving them in some direction and it's the wrong direction. So I think, I read something recently and I wish I could remember who said it or I'd attribute it, but it was some version of, a lot of the reason people don't get to their goals or get to where they want to go is because they actually don't even know where they want to go. Right? They're still following
Totally
some
agree.
prescribed, this is where my parents wanted me to go, this is where I think society wants me to go. And so when we slow down and get clear enough on that, and yes, there is a relationship between awkwardness because we're only going to endure that feeling if there feels like there's something bigger than us that we're going to have it be worth enduring it for. So, in the book, I talk about crossing the cringe chasm. I don't want you crossing every cringe chasm willy nilly. I want you to be willing to cross the ones that are in service of where you're trying to go. So, if you speaking up in that meeting is going to get you closer to that promotion, cross it. If you having that conversation with a teammate after a tough game is going to help you become a better team and that it's important to you, cross it. Not every cringe chasm needs to be crossed, but it needs to have clarity of which direction are we moving in, right? It should be somewhat directional. Once you're clear on what actually matters to you, not what other people say matters to you, but what actually matters to you, where you're trying to go, then build the process, behavior, and habits around it. But I think there's unfortunately plenty of people that, I love your framing of the word hustle as being a positive. I think the version that people sometimes attach themselves to, the negative version, is people that are building process, behavior, and habits that aren't serving where they actually want to go to bring long-term fulfillment, happiness. Their family suffers, their friendships suffer. That version, process, behavior, and habits alone aren't going to do it. You have to have clarity of what you're doing and why you're doing it first.
1000% agree. I would argue with the people who are air quotes hustling, most
Hmm.
of them are they're busy or doing busying
Sure.
things, which
Yeah.
are mostly, and I found this with a lot of male entrepreneurs, young male entrepreneurs, is we pick low hanging fruit. We do the easy things. We're not following
Hmm.
that 80-20 Pareto principle. And that to me, that is not process. That's not behavior. That's not habits. I mean, you could argue they're all bad habits and bad process,
Yeah.
etc. But I go back to this. I had a conversation with a friend slash former potential client, and he was generating $750,000 just on a podcast slash online brand, which was amazing. But he and I both saw that he had hit this glass ceiling. He was literally doing everything himself. And I
Mm.
asked the question, and I said, I don't know what you want. Do you know what you want? And he
Hmm.
just stared around the room like this. If you could see me, I'm just kind of scanning. And if it was a 15-second pause, it felt like 5 minutes. And he just started, knocking things off, like more downloads, more this, more that. And I said, "Are you just making things up?" And he's like, "Well, no, I mean, well, it was like this weird, awkward stutter." And I said, "You're
Yeah.
just making stuff up, aren't you?"
Yeah.
And he broke down and said, like, "You're right. I don't have a vision. I don't know what I want."
Yeah.
And I think you are 100% right, and I'm so glad you said it because Dustin and I say this all the time, but to me, that is almost like ground zero for a lot of us entrepreneurs. If we don't know what we want, how do we build a process, behavior, or habits around how to get there? Like, I
Yeah.
can drive from Wisconsin to Miami, Florida tomorrow, but if I don't have a
Yeah.
roadmap, good luck.
Yeah, I mean, ugh, it like breaks my heart, and it speaks to me because again, I grew up with an achievement orientation. So luckily, I've confronted myself, or had, friends who I care about, who care about me, who've confronted me with this question about, Hannah, what do you want? And I realized what I want, what I value, is actually freedom. I have several values, but one of them is freedom. Freedom to choose my own schedule, freedom to spend time with my family, freedom to take an adventure, to travel. But then sometimes that achievement orientation makes me build structures that actually are the complete opposite of that, right? I put things on my calendar in such a way, or I chase success in such a way that is actually taking me further away from that. So if I want to get intentional about process behaviors and habits that serve what I actually want, not what society tells me I should want, but
Hmm.
what I actually want, then reverse engineering into those looks very different. And that's just to put this out there, that's not easy. That's not
No,
easy. I mean, part
it's not.
part of the awkwardness conversation is, from a young age, we start to look for who we are through the lens of who do other people see, right? We start to look for our own identity through who do other people see. And sometimes it's intoxicating when somebody sees somebody who's very busy and very successful. It can be hard to shake off the shackles of that, but doing that work feels like the daily work that's worth doing.
Yeah. Well, let's peel back one more layer of that onion, and then we can wrap
Yeah.
things up. So we talk about what we want, but as you
Yeah.
said that, it got me thinking about, what do you want? And more importantly, what will make you happy? Because as a young
Hmm.
entrepreneur, I wanted in my 20s nothing more than to have the freedom, as you say, to buy a Rolex and a Porsche. And as I'm older now, almost twice as old, um, do I want those things? It's like, I don't even know that I really want those things as much anymore. Nice to have, sure, but they're not going to make me happy. I mean, at the surface
Yeah.
level, for a second, they might, but what are the actual things that I want and simultaneously will make me happy? And I almost feel like sometimes we have to ask that question, because it's like, well, I want this because it's going to make my family happy, but are you just trying to make your
Yeah.
spouse happy or your kids happy, or will it also make you happy?
Yeah. I think this is where really like dropping in to figure this out can be some of the most gratifying work we can do as humans. I read
Yes.
recently Naval Ravikant says, money doesn't solve problems, it just solves money problems. Money does solve money problems. If you're having money problems, let's be
Mm-hmm.
real. It helps. It helps a lot. It doesn't solve all of life's problems. It just solves your money problems. But once you've gotten your money problems sorted, then the rest we've known for years, this is diminishing returns, right? So what is it for? What are you tracking for? And we could have a separate 1 hour conversation about this, but all the research that came out of Harvard last year is our relationships are the number one indicator of happiness. And so whether that's your friendships, whether that's your family, whether that's the people you work with, that you love, that you serve, that's where people, based on 80 years of research, are deriving a meaningful set of happiness standards from. And again, assuming your money problems are largely solved and met, believe it or not, money's not usually part of that equation or part of that answer. So it's helpful for those of us that are caught in that spin cycle, which I used to be,
Mm-hmm.
to try to slow down and reevaluate, where is the enoughness, and are we still on the right hamster wheel? It takes a while to figure that out, but once you get off of it, it's super liberating.
Wow. I totally agree. I got to check out this Harvard study. I'm not familiar with it, but I couldn't agree more. I think relationships are really so foundational in life. And I've been saying a lot too, because we talk to a lot of sales professionals, is that sales is mostly based on relationships.
Hmm.
You have more sales, or you have more relationships, you have more sales. You have more relationships, you have more happiness.
Yeah.
It's just so important to build quality relationships in life. But I digress.
Yeah.
And it's been an absolute joy having you on the show today. Thank you for your time. I'm excited to go get a copy of your book and jump into
Thank
that as
you.
soon as this week. Before I let you go, Tell everybody what you have going on in your world these days and where they can find you online.
Oh, wonderful. Gosh, what do I have going on? I just finished speaking at South by Southwest, so that was a huge
Ooh,
honor. Really
cool.
grateful for that. I know you work with a lot of sales folks, so actually, my partner Colin Henderson and I actually also have a unique sales training that I think would be very complementary to yours, called Inside Out Selling. So different than what you all do at Hustle, but it focuses a lot on the mindset component of selling, which these days sellers know that mindset is everything. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, I'd be happy to send more details. And really just the speaking circuit this year. Speaking is my full-time job. It's what I love to do. And so if you ever, any of your listeners ever have a corporate event or a sales kickoff or a revenue kickoff or a leadership meeting, give your girl a call. We'll have a lot of fun together, I promise.
I love it. I love it. The book is on Amazon. Go
Yes,
check
and
that out.
everywhere books are sold.
Yes, go get a copy. I think that that's something that will resonate with a lot of people and that almost anyone can appreciate. So thank you for that. For all the listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode. We appreciate the ears. Until next time, peace.